You're welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We go straight to our first guest, Dr. Mohammed Lecky, who's here to speak with us on the ongoing strike by the resident doctors. Good morning, Dr. Lecky. Good to have you join us on the morning show today.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you very much. Well, let's go straight into it. It's an indefinite strike. There was a warning strike in May when the resident doctors met with the federal government and they couldn't resolve the issues. Now there's an indefinite strike. People are dying, pressure on the system, and everybody is worried. Is this ideal? Was this the only, the last resort that the resident doctors, could take, given the fact that everybody is on the edge in Nigeria at this moment? What are the issues and why did the resident doctors have to go this route?
Thank you very much. This is very unfortunate to be having this because the pains of this is cutting in so many directions. Nigerians are suffering and there are a lot of pending cases that require urgent medical attention. These are going to be put on hold, unfortunately. There's never a good time for any strike. And also, I think this is something that we need to take a deep breath, and understand. Meaning that some of what we are experiencing now are sins that come from way from the past. There have been several administrations that have made promises that they have not been able to keep. And we're now reaping the resultant effect of those promises unkept. And this should take us to the issues of leadership and governance. And so we may have to question some of these past, positions. Fortunately or unfortunately, people will take advantage of a particular situation. The fortunate thing is that we have a new government in power, and so it gives us opportunity to look back and reflect and then deal with the issues that have remained unattended to historically. One cannot blame this present government, because they never negotiated anything with NARD. But clearly, as they say, government is a continuous, process. And so they are inheriting the failure of leadership and governance from the past. And unfortunately, because there are so many pressure and so much pains going around, they unfortunately have to bear the brunt. And they are rising to the issue of leadership and governance as far as this is concerned. Now, negotiation is something that we need to, support. The good that is started, it needs to continue. But I think that in negotiating, everybody should be prepared to make sacrifices. This is a time that calls for sacrifices that we failed to make in the past. So when you come to the table, you should clear amongst yourself what is the level of sacrifice you are going to make. If you come without wanting to make any particular sacrifices and holding on to demands that are historical, they were not going to go anywhere. And I think everybody needs to make sacrifice. We're now making the right kind of sacrifice that should have been made historically to reposition the country to move forward. And so everybody has to take a share of this, including the doctors and the government and the populace. And, in a way, in a very painful way, the populace are already making the sacrifice. They're accepting and, sort of going along with this new government, with the leadership and the issue they want to see to reposition Nigeria as a better country. So every sector of the economy needs to do that and reflect. If we go back again to the issue of what we used to be, and that we must stay by what used to happen, we're not going to make any progress. And the pains and the suffering will just continue.
All right, you're talking about making sacrifices. I know that the doctors have made a lot of sacrifices, but only last week, the president of NARD had raised the alarm that there are only about 9,000 medical doctors left in the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors due to the surging migration pressure on Nigeria's healthcare system. He also says that the body has continued to record a declining membership rate from an average of about 16,000 just a few years ago. Now, with a population of over 100 million people, that is just the estimate because we still don't know how many people we are in Nigeria. It could mean that we have only one doctor for every 10,000 patients. I mean, this is far below the World Health Organization's recommendation ratio of about one doctor to 600 people. Now, is it safe to say that the shortage of doctors, have now become an endemic problem that is here to stay? The government just declared an emergency on food production. Is it about time that the government declare an emergency for the health sector?
Clearly, the health sector needs a more decisive response. And that is why, for those of us who belong to the Health Sector Reform Coalition, we have been meeting for quite some time now, since the beginning, before the beginning of this new administration, to put some set of proposals, before the government on how we should go forward with this, addressing both the issue of brain drain. There are reportedly about 50 medical doctors are leaving the shore of Nigeria every week. That's quite a lot. So which means in a month, you have close to about 200 leaving this country. That we cannot afford that. These people are very well trained, have been subsidizedly trained by government, with resources in our medical schools, and we need to do everything we can, to keep them. So we at the Reform Coalition group have come up with some robust proposals to government to address these things. And one of the issues to address, clearly the issue of condition of service for medical personnel. But it doesn't need to be a competitive issue where you have the doctors will come out with a demand and the other allied health professionals will also come out following suit to demand, because it's spiraling effects, snowballing from one profession to the other, which used to be the case in the past, which still is the case, but we need to break that cycle. So we need to look at this thing comprehensively. Clearly, we're not meeting WHO threshold of about 1 doctor per 600, we're resident. We're about 1 to 10,000. That is clearly unacceptable. And here we're hemorrhaging with about 50 doctors leaving the shore of Nigeria, every week. It's an emergency situation, and I believe the government should declare an emergency. Whether it declares or it's already an emergency situation. My point is that people need to sit down, everybody, both the doctors and other allied professionals, need to sit down and realize that this is a very critical moment in the history of the country. We are suffering the pains of the sins of the past, meaning that the sacrifices, we are being called upon, and we should be ready to make fairly extensive sacrifices, honestly. We need to. And we have seen many countries who have gone through extensive sacrifice to reposition their economy and their politics, going forward. We cannot be different. We have had opportunities missed in the past, and so we need to really go into this negotiation and thinking about what sacrifices are we ready to make. And it's a race. I don't think there's any government that comes into power that wants to inflict untold hardship on its people. It defeats the purpose of coming into power. So they're also racing and searching for solutions. And so it's a race for everyone. The important thing is that we're heading towards the same direction, finding solutions that are sustainable, meaningful, impactful, that will change the history of this country going forward. So we need to see from that point of view and begin to talk to each other in that point of view, and not having hardened position about, no, if it's either this or that, that's not going to take us anywhere.
All right, Doctor. You try to excuse the current administration from the issues on ground. But of course, I'm also aware that the resident doctors, the leadership of the resident doctors met with the secretary to the federal government, His Excellency Mr. George Akume, in addition to having met with the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, who, thankfully is the Chief of Staff to the President now. So if you're saying that this government is new, it's basically like a continuation of the same government, same party, same key people. Are we saying that the meetings with the SGF and to an extent, the gentleman who has now become the Chief of Staff, Femi Gbajabiamila, has not produced the sort of positive indications that could at least stall this strike action and then build on that towards the time that the ministers will eventually be sworn in? We know that there are at least 2 medical doctors on the ministerial list. Dr. Mohammed Pate, who worked with Goodluck Jonathan at that time and who should understand some of the issues that have been on since 2014. And of course, Dr. Betta Edu. What can be done at this point, given the Reform Coalition camp that you spoke about, so that these sufferings by the people can at least stop?
I think the thing is that leadership, governance and leadership are key elements of any way forward. And you have rightly pointed out that we have people who are now being nominated as ministers. We are cautiously optimistic in the Health Sector Reform Coalition about the people that we see their names appearing as ministers designate. We are not sure exactly who is coming, but the people that we think are coming, like we've mentioned some of them, particularly Dr. Pate, it's a very welcome, addition because it's familiar and very sound and has a lot of, gravitas that can actually steer the health sector going forward. So that is the point I'm making. So we need to give, we have been having this continued discussion with the SGF and with the Chief of Staff, Chief Benjamin Amila, and I think that we need to also allow these people who are going to be in key leadership position to assume this position so that we know who we are holding accountable, for whatever it is that we need to do. They are going to be the one piloting this. Right now, we have a number of special advisors working with my president. We have these people. They are all coming into power, coming into position and authority. And I think that I've rightly said that we are cautiously optimistic that the kind of people we are hearing, if they are the one coming to the health sector, we believe will make a lot of progress because they understand, they are familiar, they are well recognized, they have the reputational, characteristics that is required to take the health sector to the next level. So it's not to say that the discussion that was had with the former, Benjamin, who was there at the head of the House of Assembly, is all to no avail. Clearly, these are important, but these things will now be handed over to those who are going to pilot the affairs of the Federal Ministry of Health and the health sector. So we know whom to hold accountable. So those of us who are in the health sector reform, we know whom we are targeting, whom we are putting the pressure on, whom we are sending our recommendation, and not sending them to just to the presidency without anybody being held accountable. So it's a good thing that is happening, that we now have ministers coming. And the feeling that we are hearing about who is coming to the health sector, we are cautiously optimistic that we are in a good state, to go forward. And I think that this again why the issue of a little bit of patience is important. No government wand. I'm not a spokesperson for the government of President Bola Asiwaju. I'm not a spokesperson. But the point is that there is a need for everybody to take a seat, but allow the government to come in, settle down, appoint people who will be held accountable, who are responsive and responsible to Nigerian people so that we know who we're directing and channeling all out. Even with those of us in the Health Sector Reform Coalition, we have a list of very comprehensive recommendations, but we're waiting for a minister to be on place so that we can engage with him, to move forward. So I think that's the point I'm making.
Well, I would like to see that comprehensive list because it brings me to my next question. There's also the talk about the death rate among medical workers, especially doctors, which according to reports has become historically high in the last couple of months due to, high burnout rate and now coupled with economic hardship. As a health insurance expert, should the government also turn, their attention to this critical aspect? I know that the government has taken some steps to address the shortage of doctors, such as increasing the number of medical schools and offering scholarships to students who want to study medicine. I feel like these measures are encouraging, if not for anything, for the future of the health sector. I'd like for you to address both, please.
Well, for those of us who are in the health sector for a very long time now, under the leadership of the World Health Organization, I've been able to come up with certain things we regard as the building blocks for the health sector. There are about 6 such elements. And a key and number one part of that is leadership and governance. And I'll be speaking to that. And I think that right now, like going forward, we have a reset of governance. We have a new administration coming in play. We can see some signs of effective readiness to tackle things that have historically been left untackled by those who were in responsible position to do so, who failed to do so. So that is one good thing in terms of leadership and governance, going forward. We also have a number of good practices that have been in the Nigerian health space for a very long time to come. The fact that we have the National Health Insurance Scheme, which is now a National Health Insurance, agency or authority. Now, they've come up with things that can ensure that majority of Nigerians are insured. The best way to protect health is through insurance. There's no other way around it. Because otherwise, you can easily fall into acute poverty because the sickness or the sudden onset of sickness will just take out all your savings. You begin to sell and deceive. All this, you begin to sell, even sometimes sending children or women or young girls into early marriages just to be able to get money to pay for health care. So now with the National Health Insurance Scheme that is in place, and that has been rejigged, we find that it is possible to insure a lot of Nigeria. This, I think, is the priority thing for the government to do, is to ensure the insurance of all Nigerians in the health insurance scheme. So I don't have to be looking for money to pay at the point of service. And it's a good program. We have worked this one out. It's going to cost no more than 15,000 naira per person per year. That is a good buy. If you can have that kind of money, we are expecting that the money that was formerly earmarked for palliative, about 500 billion, just about 450 billion of that alone, can bring a lot of Nigerians, about 30 million Nigerians in 1 year into the health insurance coverage. Can you imagine doing that every year? In the following year, we'll get over 60. Before you know it, within 3 or 4 years, we're hitting over 150 million Nigerians covered under health insurance scheme. And by doing that, we're already achieving what is called universal healthcare coverage. So we at the SOT Front, we have this concrete recommendation of what should be done. And then the state also have to play their part. And then we have the money that is coming to the federal government, which is going to be going more now because of this saving from the removal of subsidy. We understand that in the last month alone, over 1 trillion or so naira was being shared at the FAC level. So we have a 1% of money from the federal government share alone coming to the health sector under the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund right now. So you can imagine the federal government alone having more money now, they can actually put more. And if the state contribute their own share quota, which they are not contributing at the moment as we speak, their counterpart, they are not paying. If you can take that from the federation account, instead of depending on the federal government, federal considered revenue alone, we have more money so we can actually do this thing. All we need is to pool this money and insure everybody, and we can insure everybody, with pooling of resources across the board. So that will address this issue of untimely death, sicknesses that are not attended to because people cannot go to the hospital because they are afraid, they don't have any money, they have to desave, they have to sell things, they may have to send children into early marriage just to get money to be able to take care of their basic health needs. So I think these are some of the recommendations, these are the recommendations we are taking forward that the government need to take forward. And once we have a minister in place, we're pushing all these things that will ensure that every Nigerian, whether the person is employed or not, has access to affordable health care that can be paid for through some form of insurance pooling, both by the state, by the federal government, through the NHIS, and even the private sector, like, Arise, for example, should also be part of organized private sector. They should be looking inward and say, what are we doing to cover people who work for Arise? What kind of insurance are we paying into to ensure that they are covered as well? So it's everybody's responsibility to pay their own share into some form of a pool of money that will provide coverage for all Nigerians. And once we are committed to do under the leadership of a good minister, you find that we make very steady and fast progress in covering Nigeria, and they will have access to good healthcare. I know the other side of the coin is the issue of the service itself. How sound is the service? That's where the health human resources come in. How do we stem the tail of people going abroad? We need to adjust the salary issue, and which I believe the government has said they were going to do, which is one of the reasons why they pulled back on the earlier, indication of just paying 8,000 naira per person, per month, for the next, 6 months. To address salary issues, address the issue of condition of services, and all these are the things we need to do. And I think that's what the medical doctors and all health professionals are asking for. Take a second look at the condition of service. Increase the salaries. Clearly, that is something that needs to be done. And then look at other issues of equipment and retrofitting of medical health facilities across the country, both at primary health care level, secondary health care level, as well as tertiary health care level. If we come together under a leadership of a sound minister, which I think we're going to have, not that we didn't have some before. I can mention a couple of them during the time of Professor Lambo or Shotimere, where the golden era of health reform in Nigeria. We can go back and dust off these good practices that we had and scale them up, and we're going to make tremendous progress.
All right, Doctor. I appreciate your optimism about the new minister that might come, if it turns out to be Dr. Pate. But I would like you to address the injury that might have, happened to the negotiations during the last administration, given the tone that the former Labour minister, Dr. Chris Ngige, who happened to be a medical doctor, by the way, was using. His tone was quite adversarial, and at a point he said that the demands by the resident doctors were absurd. We didn't hear so much, interestingly, from Dr. Osagie Ehanire, who was the Minister of Health himself. Maybe he preferred more silent negotiations than the kind of hardline stance that his Labour counterpart had. So do you think that major damage will have been done by the stance of people like Dr. Chris Ngige? And how do you think that the incoming minister should walk that route in ensuring that things, relationships get better? And then secondly, I would like you to address the aspect of the hazard allowance that was rejected by the resident doctors, the 25,000, I believe, per quarter. You recall, sir, that about 2 years ago, it was just about 5,000 that was approved, and that was accepted. In the part of Nigeria that I come from, what is said is that you do not refuse money. You refuse money into your pocket and then negotiate for more. Why do you think, what is the wisdom in the resident doctors rejecting this 25,000 proposed hazard allowance as part of the palliatives by the new government?
Well, I like your last point on this issue of rejecting 25,000 naira palliative vis-a-vis 5,000, which was, seemingly acceptable in the past. I don't know what is the wisdom behind NARD. The one can only speculate. I'm not a member of NARD, so I wouldn't know. I would speak for them. But I think I agree with you from that part of the country you come from. I think I'm also from that part. It's clear wisdom that you accept what you can get in your pocket now and then take off from there and reject altogether. But again, these are all negotiation issues, really. When you're sitting across the table with people you are negotiating with, you have this kind of very hardened position. And then if you are all working towards having a compromise, everybody will soften, and then something will come out. And I believe something will come out. But the issue is the issue of race, the issue of time. That's the issue. On the issue of Dr. Hanere, former minister, immediate past minister of Health, and Chris Ngige, who himself is a doctor, but actually was a product of the Federal Ministry of Health. We were colleagues in the Ministry of Health together before he went, into politics. I don't have a clear understanding of his hard stand against, the doctor. That would be unfortunate. But the case is that, this is the point I'm making, governance and leadership is very important. These are two separate, different individuals that took different approach to the same, challenge that they faced. So now, if we have, and we are happy and like cautiously optimistic about the incoming, Minister of Health, there is quite possible that we take a much more, comprehensive and much more welcoming position. That's why people matters when matters come to play. And in this case, we have this matter on our hand that needs to be resolved, must be resolved to go forward. And then we're having new cast of characters that are coming in, whom we're cautiously optimistic about. So I believe that it will be different from the position that was taken by Dr. Ngige, Minister Ngige, and Minister Hanere may have been working behind the scene. We don't know exactly what he was doing quietly that we didn't know about. So my answer would be that let us move on from the past and let's start looking forward. Let us be all optimistic that the future holds brighter for Nigeria and that the people that are coming with guided advice from coalition like us, they will take the right decision that will take Nigerian health sector to the next level. Right.
You just said that you're not sure of the wisdom of NARD in rejecting the 25,000 naira raise. But a lot of analysts have said that the issue of doctors, going abroad is a case of the poor subsidizing the rich. If we talk about the health sector in Nigeria. Nigeria has a health expenditure of about $71 per person, compared to the cost of healthcare for countries such as the United States, where health spending per individual is about $11,000 per person. That is a huge disparity. And we know that NARD has been engaging the federal government since January without avail. You have talked about sacrifice. We understand that, the doctors have to sacrifice, but I'd like to, touch on the code of ethics for doctors going on this type of strike at this point. It's a huge burden on the public health sector as we speak. Compounded with our economic situation.
The hypocritical oath that is sworn to by doctors does not recommend these kinds of painful, strikes. But we can understand why the doctors, as a professional group, as a pressure group, we want to also look out for the benefit and condition of service of their members. It's a competitive, world that we live in. There are other sectors too. The farmers, the bankers, the media. Everybody is elbowing for a physical space that will accommodate their needs. So in that case, one cannot fault, what they are doing. But the timing, I still believe, and also the historical antecedent, which is that we have failed in the past, which is failure of leadership and governance, is so important. And that is why it is the number one building block, even in the health sector, as championed by WHO, the number one priority in the health sector, I don't know about other sector, is health leadership and governance. It matters a lot. It devolves around whether we are going to have the right infrastructure, take the right decision, right financing mechanism for health insurance, what type. It all revolves around that leadership and governance. So the doctors and those who are leaving, the country, it is their right, to leave. But there are other ways in which there are many things that other countries have put in place to address that. They have to, work with the recipient countries in terms of some kind of ameliorative, a measure that can be put in place. Well, WHO has actually given a framework on how that can be structured. We can bring that up as well. But also there are other issues about, the doctors are first and foremost Nigerians. We know that it's personal interest that matters the most. But also look at the larger, issue. And like I said, sacrifices are, if we don't make sacrifices, if we don't make sacrifices in our own personal life, our family will not make progress. We dip into our savings to pay for healthcare for others who are relatives, who are not even our direct, siblings or direct, children. That is all sacrifice. So beneath the issue of promoting and ensuring good leadership and good governance is the issue of sacrifice. What sacrifice are we going to make, or are we unready to make any sacrifice at all? And I think as a people, we should not. And if we see a government that seems to be positioning itself to be listening and willing to take unheard of, unimaginable, bold decisions that are painful to itself as well as to its populace, then I think that is some kind of optimism for us to be able to move forward. I think that is the way I would look at it. And I would actually advise that, NAD will get back to the negotiating table. There should be some flexibility, both on the part of government and the part of NAD, so that Nigerians who are suffering, can be alleviated from this suffering. People are waiting to be treated. People are dying. People are looking for medicine. People are looking for prescription. And that is not happening as we speak. And that is not good for a country that is ready to move forward.
All right, I do agree with you that there must be flexibility in how this has been approached. But do you think that there are lessons to be learned from what has happened and is happening in the UK, where the NHS has just experienced one of its worst strikes in the medical space in a long while? Junior doctors, medical consultants, going on strike. And at the heart of it is the question of fair pay to health workers, fair pay to nurses, to doctors and medical consultants. Are there lessons for NAD to learn in how they went about their own strike in the UK? And are there lessons for the Nigerian government, the new government especially, to learn in how the UK government, the British government, responded to the demands by NED? But not just the lessons in terms of how do you deal with strikes, but also lessons in terms of the health insurance and how states can key in into these sort of negotiations that you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, there are clearly useful lessons. And also one important element of the UK experience is that a great number of those doctors in the UK are Nigerians who are working there. Some of them are the junior or middle level. And so they are talking to their NAD counterparts, in Nigeria. And I think that they should be talking and seeing, instead of posturing, blistering, or that you want to stay in a particular fixed position of negotiation, we should be looking for flexibility. Let's find out what did they do exactly. Have they resolved it, in the UK? I'm not sure it has been completely resolved, but if they are resolving it, what are those things that they have decided to do that we can domesticate in the case? But we are two different economies, at the same time. I'm sure some of you have heard about what Canada is doing now, actively encouraging, not just Nigerian people across the world to come to Canada, particularly looking for professionals, making it easy for them to do that. So we need to find a way, to make it not so easy for us to lose Nigerians going to these places. And by sitting down and discussing with NAD and other professionals, what do we need to do? And again, we need a leader in the health sector that will do that, who will look at the experience of what is going on in the UK and also in other places like Canada I just mentioned, and including of the US in terms of their health insurance program, and see how do we modify what we have that can make it better. It's not all the time that we decide to throw away the baby and the bathtub. You know, we have a good national health insurance scheme program. I'm not saying this because I was the one that started this in Nigeria, but I think they have a good start, they have a good program that we need to have the state and the non-state actors and also the organized private sector like companies like Arise and those who are private sector to buy into it, understand the sort of fighting it, and say you can take it forward. If we do this and there's a spirit of convergence around this kind of national health insurance program that the health sector reform is also promoting, we can find that a number of these issues of pay and as well as infrastructure for the health sector and various allowances, they will all kind of fall into place. But we're not doing what we need to do. And again, we need a lot of work that needs to be done. And that work has to be championed by the leadership of the health sector for this to happen, including learning from the experiences from other countries like the UK, Canada, and the US.
Well, as we wrap up, I just wanted to highlight again what NAD is asking. And, you know, it's a lot, because if you look at the document that came out, they're asking for the payment of the 2023 Medical Residency Training Fund, which they say has been delayed despite several government engagements. They're also asking for the salary arrears from 2014, 2015, and 2016. Owed its members, those monies have not been paid. I mean, they're also asking for hazard allowance arrears and arrears of the consequential adjustment of the minimum wage, which are pending, and other issues. I mean, when you look at this whole sector, which is one of the most important sector in our economy, the health sector, I mean, can you really now blame the doctors? Years on end, they haven't been paid. Where are they expected to get the money from and continue to do their work and hold their, as you call it, hypocritical oath?
It will be unfair, you know, for me to give, you know, comment comprehensively on each of these demands. It would have been better if we know, for example, for each of the demand, what is the government response? Money that has been owed since 2020, you know, things have been negotiated, arrears that have been agreed upon for about 3 or 4 years ago, or arrears that were agreed upon only recently. What exactly is the point? We need to look at it in an annotated manner. For each one of these, what is the government saying? Is it saying no, or is it renegotiating it? Were there flaws in this negotiation? Well, the government must respond to each and every of this. And I believe it's a hearing and listening government. Again, I don't know whom they are meeting with. You spoke earlier about a meeting with the SGF and meeting with former Chief of Staff Bajamia, who's now, former head of National Assembly in the House of Representatives. You know, now that we're having this cast of actors in place, we now have a structure, I believe, that now all these 4 or 5 points that you just listed can now be put on the table with officials from the Federal Ministry of Health, who is primarily responsible for health in Nigeria, to address them and take a set of proposals to the Federal Executive Council for implementation. And I think that is what it's going to take. All these demands are not illegitimate. But the point is that who is to actually pilot and take this forward? You know, whose responsibility is it? Is it the SGF? Is it the head of service? So this is to be narrowed down. And I think that it should be a health sector issue, and the leadership of the health sector should sit squarely. And I think the leadership of the health sector is now coming into place. So for me, I'm very optimistic. I think that's my point. I'm optimistic that this issue will be resolved. And therefore, a government that seemingly is now taking the right decision in terms of accruals coming to government because of savings coming from this thing, there'll be much more money available, and there's a lot more room and flexibility for all this kind of demand to be met. Before, some of these things were agreed upon without any clear source of where the money is going to come from, and so there was a failure. And that was a failure of governance in the past. But I don't see that happening because there's a convergence of good things happening. One, there is indication of good leadership and governance coming. There's indication that more money now will be coming. So with more money coming, and then there will be more, pies that will be available from the slices of the pie that will be available to be used to address all these issues. So once we have the savings coming, and then there'll be no excuse then to say, but you have these savings for about a year or so, so how are you spending the money? So it's a question of a bit patient. There's issue beyond the sacrifice, it's also the issue of timing. So we need to really sit down, scale this thing time-wise, and have to make the sacrifices and give incoming administration some breathing space to be able to address this. I don't think that any government wants to come and flex its muscle and say, no, we're not going to address this. I mean, everybody is going to suffer as a result, including members who are members of the government itself.
All right, as we wrap up, Dr. Lecky, I'll be happy if you could share the top 2 or 3 of the ideas that the Health Sector Reform Coalition Group that you made reference to has worked on, that you can present to the incoming Minister of Health. What would be the top 2, 3 recommendations that you already have? If you could share that with us, so that people begin to see that it's not just about agitation on the part of NAD and NMA to some extent, but that there are other aggregates, there are other people, stakeholders, who are actually thinking and putting forward workable ideas that the new minister can run with.
Well, the most important point for us in the Health Sector Reform Coalition group is on the issue of healthcare financing. If we have the money, a lot can be done. And so we prioritize healthcare financing. And healthcare financing decision is a governance and leadership matter. We have calculated that we need to rapidly, within the next 1 year, bring about 30 million Nigerians into health insurance coverage. And it is doable. We have the money from the savings and even much more. Beyond the 500 billion or 50 that was suggested earlier, if we have additional money coming, which we will have coming to the Federation account, as well as the federal government share of the Federation account with the CFR, which is 1% for the basic healthcare fund. So more money will be available for that. First, even without changing the percentage, more money will come in itself, because 1% will just bring in more money because you have more to share. And if the state government, who are currently not paying their counterpart for the basic healthcare provision fund, pays their counterpart, about 20% counterpart of what they receive. If they pay that will bring more money. But we're saying that because there is a reluctance to pay, which also impact on ability to deliver services, why not take the money from the source and take that money from the Federation account instead of the federal government share or the Federation account alone? So if we agree, which is administratively very convenient to do. So if we do that, we have more money. And the state will play their own part. And then the organized private sector also need to play their own part in terms of ensuring people who are working for them. So it's all about this healthcare financing. How do we pool the money? And we have mechanism of how to pull it. It can be pulled administratively, conveniently, in a way that we have quantum of money that will significantly provide coverage for Nigeria. We're even looking at a minimum of 30 million Nigeria within 1 year. And that would be a big chunk of Nigeria covered. And if you scale that over the next few years, Nigeria will clearly be on its way to what is called universal healthcare coverage by doing that. We're also asking that the issue of infrastructure, we need to take a look at this. So how do we finance primary healthcare in particular? We have left it in the hands of local government, which is the weakest point in the link of people who are providing healthcare in Nigeria. So we need to find a more interventionist, government, program to deal with primary healthcare. And the good thing again is that the incoming administration, the person we think is coming to the health sector, is an expert in primary healthcare. So we need to do something about primary healthcare, not leave it to the hands of local government, clearly. So we need to have a more federal level intervention in terms of primary healthcare. So if we reject the leadership, which we are going to do, and with appropriate appointment of the right people, caliber, who have the energy to drive like we have had in the past, and if we deal with the issue of healthcare financing, like I've mentioned, and I've given you various slices of how the money can come in and I can bring about a large pool of funding. If we can do something with the primary healthcare, if we can do something about the infrastructure, particularly the issue of vaccine production and pharmaceuticals. Nigeria is big enough that we can have self-sufficiency and health security in terms of vaccine production and pharmaceutical. So all these things, I think, are 3 key issues that I think the next government, the new incoming Minister of Health, can take forward, and which we at the Health Sector Reform Coalition are pushing. And of course, we don't forget the issue of migration, the brain drain. So now that is a 4th issue. Probably the second most important after the issue of health, governance and leadership. We need to do something about the condition of service of a health sector, personnel, so that they can remain here or incentive. Even if they have to go, there must be a framework agreement with the recipient country to ensure that something come back to Nigeria to develop our national healthcare system.
Well, all right.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Lecky, Pioneer Executive Secretary, National Health Insurance Scheme, for joining us on the morning show this morning. Thank you very much indeed.